This is my first time posting here, so bear with me. I'm still trying to process everything that's been happening, but I need some perspective, or maybe just to get this off my chest. My wife, Emily, and I have been married for 6 years, together for 8. We met in college, bonded over our shared love for hiking and indie movies, and things just kind of clicked. She was this fiery, ambitious woman who always seemed one step ahead of everyone else. I admired her drive and her ability to light up a room. I never thought we'd be the couple that falls apart, but lately, something's felt off. It started small, like a nagging whisper at the back of my mind. Emily's always been busy, but recently her work trips have become more frequent. She's a marketing consultant, and her job requires a lot of networking. I never questioned it before. She'd always been honest about her schedule. Then, about 2 months ago, I noticed the late nights were more frequent. The way she'd glance at her phone and smile to herself seemed different. There were also the times when she'd claim she was stuck in meetings, but came home with her makeup looking freshly applied. I tried to shake it off. We all have busy spells, right? Stress can make anyone act differently. But the doubts kept creeping in. One night, while she was showering, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I glanced at it, just a reflex, I swear, and saw a notification from someone named Ryan. The message preview said, "Can't stop thinking about last night." My stomach dropped. I didn't open it. I didn't say anything. I just sat there, staring at the screen, trying to convince myself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe it was a work thing, a misunderstanding. Emily wouldn't do that to me, would she? That was the moment the whisper turned into something louder. After that night, things between Emily and me felt different, at least on my end. She didn't seem to notice anything, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was being paranoid. Relationships need trust, right? That's what I kept telling myself. But once you've seen something like that, it's impossible to unsee it. I started paying more attention, noticing things I'd brushed off before. Emily was glued to her phone. If she wasn't holding it, it was always face down on the table or tucked into her bag. She used to show me memes or random posts she found funny, but now, nothing. And then there was her laughter. It sounds ridiculous, but I swear it was different. She'd giggle at her phone in a way I hadn't heard in years. Not the kind of laugh you give your spouse when they say something silly. It was softer, more flirtatious. I tried to let it go, convincing myself that maybe work had just been more interesting lately. Maybe she'd made a new friend. Then one night, while we were lying in bed, she got a text. She glanced at her phone, smiled, and put it down without replying. "What's funny?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. She looked over at me, her smile fading just slightly. "Oh, nothing. Just a dumb group chat thing." I nodded, pretending to believe her, but I couldn't ignore the pit in my stomach. A few days later, she told me she'd be working late again. "Another client dinner," she said. She kissed me goodbye, grabbed her purse, and left with the same polished look she used for big presentations. But as she walked out the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I decided to check something that had been bothering me for weeks. Emily and I share our locations on our phones. It's something we'd set up years ago when I went on a hiking trip alone. I opened the app, expecting to see her at the office or the restaurant she mentioned. She wasn't it either. Her location showed her at a hotel across town. My heart sank. I stared at the screen, trying to convince myself it was a glitch, an error, anything other than what it looked like. But deep down, I knew. I knew something was wrong. For the rest of the night, I couldn't stop checking the app. She stayed at the hotel for nearly 3 hours before heading home. When she walked through the door, she greeted me like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just spent hours lying to me. "How was dinner?" I asked, trying to sound normal. She kicked off her heels, tossing her purse on the counter. "Fine. Just the usual boring work talk." And then she smiled, that same bright, confident smile that used to make me feel like the luckiest guy in the world. Now it just felt hollow. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I could bring this up, or if I even should. What if I was wrong? What if I was reading too much into it? But what if I wasn't? By morning, I'd made up my mind. I had to find out the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The next morning, Emily was back to her usual routine. Coffee, makeup, scrolling through her phone at the kitchen table while I made us breakfast. It was almost eerie how normal everything felt. But I wasn't normal. I couldn't stop replaying the events of the night before, her polished lie about dinner and the 3 hours she spent at that hotel. Every glance at her felt like staring at a stranger, someone who looked like my wife but wasn't the person I thought I knew. I knew I couldn't confront her without proof. If I was wrong, and I was desperate to be wrong, bringing this up would wreck the trust we built. But if I was right, I couldn't just let it slide. I needed something concrete. That day, while Emily was at work, I started digging. First, I checked our shared credit card statement. I wasn't expecting much. Emily's good at covering her tracks, but I needed to start somewhere. At first glance, nothing jumped out. Groceries, coffee shops, the occasional lunch with coworkers. Then I saw it, a charge from the hotel she'd been at last night. It wasn't big, just for the bar, but seeing it there confirmed my worst fear. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling my hands shake. I wanted to slam the laptop shut, to shove the truth away and pretend this wasn't happening. But I couldn't. I had to keep going. Next, I checked our cell phone bill. It wasn't hard to spot a pattern. Over the past few months, she'd been texting and calling one number way more than anyone else. Late at night, early in the morning, during lunch breaks, it was constant. I copied the number down and did something I never thought I'd do. I searched it online. The name Ryan popped up. I felt sick. This was it, wasn't it? The name from that first text. The name that had been haunting me for weeks. Now it was real. By the time Emily got home, I'd calmed myself down enough to act normal. She walked in with the same radiant energy she always carried after work, kissing me on the cheek and chatting about her day. I nodded, smiled, and made small talk, but my mind was elsewhere. I had a plan now. I wasn't going to accuse her, not yet. I needed to see this through. That night, as she slept, I carefully unlocked her phone. She'd been using the same password for years. What I found made my stomach churn. There were messages to Ryan. Not just a few, but dozens. Hundreds. Some of them were casual, talking about work or random things from their day. But others, I can't stop thinking about last night. You looked amazing in that dress. I can still feel you against me. When are we doing this again? I need you. I felt like I was reading something out of a bad romance novel, except this was my life. My wife. My marriage. I put her phone back and sat in the living room, staring at the dark screen of the TV, my mind racing. She wasn't just lying to me. She was building a whole other life with someone else. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? By morning, I'd made a decision. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. I needed more. I needed to know just how far this had gone. So, I called in sick to work and hired a private investigator. The private investigator was a guy named Mark, middle-aged and no-nonsense. When I called, he asked for the basic details. Emily's work schedule, the number I found, and any other suspicious behavior I'd noticed. As I laid it all out for him, I felt a mix of shame and anger. Shame for needing to go this far, and anger because I shouldn't have to. I should have been able to trust my wife. Mark didn't sugarcoat anything. Look, I've seen this kind of thing before. I'll dig into it, but I'm warning you, it might get ugly. Are you ready for that? No, I wasn't. But I told him yes. He got to work right away. Over the next few days, I tried to act normal around Emily, but it was exhausting. Every time she smiled at me, every time she kissed me goodbye, I wanted to scream, "How can you do this to me?" But I didn't. I played my part, just like she was playing hers. Mark was quick. He called me 3 days later with an update. "She's definitely meeting him," he said bluntly. "Ryan works at a different company across town. Looks like they've been sneaking around during her work hours. Lunches, coffee shops, and yeah, the hotel you mentioned." The words hit like a punch to the gut. I could barely speak. How often?" "Often enough," he replied. "I've got photos if you want them. Do you want to see?" I hesitated. Did I want to see my wife wrapped around another man? Did I need to? "Yes," I finally said. He sent them over while we were still on the phone. My heart pounded as I opened the email. There she was, Emily, the woman I'd built a life with, leaning into Ryan like he was her everything. In one photo, they were sitting at an outdoor cafe, her hand on his knee, their faces inches apart. In another, they were walking into the hotel, laughing like teenagers sneaking out past curfew. But the one that broke me? A shot of them in the hotel bar. She was wearing the dress she'd bought for our anniversary last year. The one she swore she didn't feel like wearing when I'd suggested she put it on for our dinner out. I thanked Mark and told him to keep following them. I needed every detail. When I hung up, I just sat there, staring at those pictures. I wanted to rip them up, throw my phone against the wall, something. But instead, I just cried. I hadn't cried like that in years. When Emily got home that evening, she looked so innocent, so carefree, like she wasn't carrying the weight of her betrayal. "How was your day?" she asked, dropping her bag on the kitchen counter. "Fine," I replied, forcing a smile. "Yours?" "Busy," she said with a sigh. "You know how work is." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I know how work is, I thought bitterly. That night, as I lay awake next to her, the photos burned in my mind. It wasn't just the physical betrayal. It was everything. The lies, the secrets, the way she came home to me every night and acted like nothing was wrong. She thought I didn't know, but soon, she'd find out just how wrong she was. After seeing the photos, something shifted in me. The heartbreak was still there, heavy and raw, but beneath it, something else was starting to surface: anger. Not the fiery, impulsive kind, but a quiet, simmering rage that settled deep in my chest. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way Emily would laugh at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. The late-night showers after she'd come home, exhausted from work. The way she'd avoid meeting my eyes when she talked about her day. She was sloppy. Maybe she thought I was too trusting, or too stupid to notice. One evening, she came home with a bottle of wine, saying her team had given it to her as a thank you for all her hard work on a big project. Normally, I might have believed her, but now everything felt like a lie. I smiled and thanked her, pretending like I wasn't dying inside. Over dinner, I decided to test her. "How's Ryan doing?" I asked casually, taking a sip of my drink. Her fork froze midway to her mouth, just for a split second, before she recovered. "Ryan?" "Yeah," I said, keeping my tone light. "You've mentioned him before, right? From work?" "Oh," she said, her laugh forced. "Yeah, he's fine. Why do you ask?" "No reason," I said with a shrug. "Just curious." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "He's just a colleague. Nothing exciting to tell." Her deflection was almost impressive. Almost. That night, while she showered, I checked her phone again. The texts with Ryan were still there, just as explicit as before. I noticed a new message thread with him from earlier that day. "Ryan, did you like the wine?" "Emily, loved it. You're too sweet." So the wine wasn't from her team after all. I put her phone back and sat on the edge of the bed, my fists clenched. She was sitting here, in our home, drinking wine another man had given her, while I played the role of clueless husband. But I wasn't clueless anymore. The next morning, I called Mark. "What's the most damning evidence you've got so far?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "There's a recording. I followed them to the hotel a couple of days ago and caught them talking as they walked in. It's explicit." I closed my eyes, bracing myself. "Send it to me." An hour later, I sat in my car in the driveway, headphones in, as I played the recording. Ryan's voice came through first, low and teasing. "You've got no idea how much I've been thinking about you. I couldn't get that last night out of my head." Emily laughed, the same laugh that used to feel like home. "You're bad for me," she said, her tone playful. "You're going to get me in so much trouble." His reply sent a chill down my spine. He doesn't have to know. The file ended there. I sat in silence for what felt like hours. The air in the car felt suffocating, thick with the weight of everything I'd learned. I had all the proof I needed, but now I had to decide. What was I going to do with it? For the rest of that day, I couldn't focus on anything. My mind was a storm of emotions: anger, betrayal, heartbreak, but also a weird, detached calm. Like my brain had switched to autopilot, focusing only on the next steps. I wasn't going to let Emily keep lying to me. Not anymore. But if I was going to confront her, I needed to make sure I did it on my terms. That night, while Emily was at her yoga class, a class I now knew was code for meeting Ryan, I sat down at the kitchen table with all the evidence. The photos, the credit card receipts, the text I'd forwarded to myself, and now, the recording. It was more than enough. I called Mark. "I need one last thing," I said. "What's that?" he asked. "Proof of how long this has been going on," I replied. "Can you dig deeper? Find out when they first started meeting?" "Already on it," he said. "Give me a couple of days." I thanked him and hung up, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction. Emily came home an hour later, her hair damp and her face flushed like she'd been working out. She kissed me on the cheek and asked if I wanted tea before bed. "Sure," I said, forcing a smile. As she moved around the kitchen, humming to herself, I couldn't stop staring at her. This was the same woman I'd loved for years, the one I'd built a life with, and now I barely recognized her. How could she stand there, so calm, so normal, after everything she'd done? That night, as she fell asleep beside me, I made my decision. I wasn't going to shout or rage or throw things when I confronted her. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing how deeply she'd hurt me. Instead, I was going to dismantle her lies piece by piece, showing her that I knew everything. The next morning, I called a divorce lawyer. I told them the situation, laying out the evidence I had so far. The lawyer was professional but blunt. "You've got a strong case," they said, "especially with the photos and the recording. If she's been using joint funds to cover her tracks, that'll help, too." "What do I need to do next?" I asked. "Gather as much financial evidence as you can," they said. "Bank statements, credit card transactions, anything that shows a pattern of spending tied to her affair. And be ready to have a conversation about dividing assets if it comes to that." It felt surreal, talking about dividing assets when just weeks ago, I thought we were still a team. That evening, I went through our finances with a fine-toothed comb. Sure enough, there were plenty of expenses I couldn't account for. Restaurant bills, hotel stays, even a couple of purchases at jewelry stores. When I was done, I had a folder full of evidence. The next day, Mark called back. "I've got the timeline," he said. "Based on their text records and some older surveillance footage, it looks like this started about 8 months ago. Maybe longer." 8 months. Almost an entire year of lies. I thanked him, hung up, and sat there in silence. 8 months ago, I had taken Emily on a weekend getaway for our anniversary. We'd walked along the beach, toasted with champagne, and talked about starting a family someday. She was already cheating on me back then. The anger I'd been holding back finally broke through. My hands shook as I grabbed the folder and stuffed it into my work bag. It was time. That night, when Emily came home, I was sitting at the kitchen table, the folder in front of me. "Hey," she said, dropping her bag on the counter. "What's up?" "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady. Her smile faltered. "Okay, about what?" I gestured to the chair across from me. "Sit down." She hesitated, her eyes narrowing slightly. "What's going on?" "Just sit," I said. When she finally did, I opened the folder and slid the first photo across the table. Her face went pale. "Care to explain this?" I asked. Emily stared at the photo like it was a bomb about to go off. Her eyes darted from the picture to me, her mouth opening and closing as if she was searching for words but couldn't find any. I stayed quiet, letting the weight of the moment press down on her. I wanted her to sit with it, to feel the full impact of being caught. Finally, she forced out a laugh, strained, shaky, completely unconvincing. "What is this?" she asked, sliding the photo back toward me. "Why are you showing me this?" I tilted my head, my gaze locked on hers. "You know exactly what it is, Emily." Her lips trembled for a second before she forced them into a tight smile. "It's not what it looks like," she said, her voice rising slightly. "Oh." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "Then why don't you tell me what it is?" She hesitated, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. "This is ridiculous," she finally said, standing up and crossing her arms. "I don't know what you think you've found, but it's not what you think." I could feel my anger rising, but I kept my voice calm, controlled. "It's not just this," I said, pulling out another photo and sliding it across the table. This one showed her and Ryan walking into the hotel together. Or this, I added, placing another photo of them laughing at the cafe. Her face went pale again, and she sank back into the chair. How did you? Does it matter? I cut her off. What matters is that I know, Emily. I know about Ryan. I know about the hotel. I know about everything. Her mouth opened as if to argue, but no words came out. I reached into the folder and pulled out the receipts next, charges from the hotel bar, the restaurant bills, even the jewelry purchase. Do you want to explain this? Or should I keep going? She pressed her hands to her face, her shoulders slumping. Okay, she whispered. Okay, fine. I've been seeing him. Hearing her admit it hit harder than I expected. I already knew the truth, but having it confirmed out loud made it feel so much more real. How long? I asked, my voice cold. She didn't answer. How long? I repeated, sharper this time. 8 months, she said quietly, her voice barely audible. 8 months. The words hung in the air like poison, filling the space between us. Why? I demanded, my voice trembling now. Why him? Why this? She looked up at me, her eyes glistening with tears. I don't know, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. I slammed my hand on the table, the sound echoing through the room. Don't give me that. I shouted. You didn't just fall into this, Emily. You made a choice. Over and over again, you chose him. She flinched, her tears falling freely now. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I'm so sorry. Sorry? I said, my voice dripping with bitterness. You're sorry now? After 8 months of lying to me, sneaking around, sleeping with him, now you're sorry. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I didn't want to hurt you, she said. I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. Didn't want to hurt me? Emily, do you have any idea what you've done? You've destroyed everything. She reached across the table, her hand trembling as she tried to take mine. I'll end it, she said desperately. I'll never see him again. We can fix this. Please. I pulled my hand back like her touch burned. No, Emily. You don't get to decide that. You've made your choice, and now you have to live with it. She broke down, sobbing into her hands. I stood up, grabbing the folder and tucking it under my arm. We're done talking, I said, my voice cold and final. I'll be staying at a hotel tonight. Don't expect me to come back tomorrow. As I walked out the door, I could hear her crying, calling after me. But I didn't look back. For the first time in months, I felt like I was finally taking control. That night at the hotel, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the folder I'd brought with me. I'd replayed the confrontation over and over in my mind, dissecting every word Emily said, every tear she shed. Was she crying because she was genuinely sorry, or because she got caught? I tried to sleep, but my thoughts wouldn't stop racing. The room felt too big, too quiet. The bed was cold without her next to me, and as much as I hated to admit it, I missed her. Not the version of her who betrayed me, but the Emily I thought I knew. The woman who used to kiss me on the forehead while I made coffee, who sang along to every song in the car, even when she didn't know the words. The woman who promised me forever on our wedding day. I thought about going back, not to forgive her, not yet, maybe not ever, but just to talk, to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. But every time I reached for my phone, I stopped myself. She doesn't deserve that, I thought. Not after everything. The next morning, I checked my phone. 12 missed calls and even more text from Emily. Please come home. I'm so sorry. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Please, just talk to me. I can't believe I did this to us. I don't even know who I am anymore. And then, near the end of the night, I ended it with him. I swear. Please, let's talk. I stared at the messages for a long time, torn between anger and something else I couldn't quite name. I didn't respond. By the time I got home that evening, the house felt different. It wasn't just that Emily wasn't there. It was the weight of everything that had happened, the knowledge that this wasn't my sanctuary anymore. It felt like a place full of secrets and lies. The kitchen was spotless, The counters wiped down like she was trying to erase any trace of the argument the night before. But it didn't work. I could still feel the echoes of her tears, the coldness in my own voice. Her note was on the table, written in shaky handwriting. I'm staying at Monica's for a few days to give you space. Please let me know when you're ready to talk. I folded it and shoved it into the folder with everything else. The next few days passed in a blur. I threw myself into work, avoiding texts from Emily and dodging questions from coworkers who noticed I wasn't myself. I told them I was just tired, but the truth was, I felt like I was floating through my own life, watching it unravel from the outside. Emily sent messages every day, sometimes long apologies, sometimes just a simple I love you. I ignored all of them, though each one chipped away at the wall I was trying to build. Then, on the fourth day, I got a call from Mark. Got something new for you, he said. What is it? I asked, my stomach tightening. She may have told you she ended it, but, he hesitated. But what? I snapped, already knowing the answer. She's still talking to him, he said. Texts, phone calls, all of it. I followed her yesterday. She met him at a park. It wasn't long, maybe 15 minutes, but they were there, talking, hugging. She wasn't wearing her wedding ring. The air left my lungs like I'd been punched. Did you get photos? I asked, my voice cold. Yeah, he said. I'll send them over. When the photos came through, I opened them immediately. There they were, Emily and Ryan, standing too close, her hand on his chest as he smiled at her like I didn't exist. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. That night, I called her. She picked up on the first ring. Oh my God, you called. I've been waiting to hear from you. Stop, I said, cutting her off. I don't want to hear it. What do you mean? She asked, her voice trembling. I mean, I know you're still seeing him, Emily, I said, my tone ice cold. Mark saw you yesterday. I have photos. So whatever apology you've been rehearsing, don't bother. There was a long silence. I could hear her breathing, could almost picture the panic spreading across her face. John, I'm filing for divorce, I said, my voice steady. I wanted to give you a chance to come clean, but clearly, you don't respect me enough for that. No, she cried, her voice breaking. It wasn't like that. I just needed to talk to him, to end it face to face. Please, John, don't do this. I'll cut him off, I swear. You already promised that, I snapped. And yet, here we are. She sobbed, her words barely audible through the phone. I love you. Please, don't give up on us. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. I'll go to therapy. I'll do whatever it takes. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath before speaking. You've already taken everything from me, Emily. Don't expect me to give you any more chances. And with that, I hung up. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. After that phone call, there was no turning back. The next day, I met with my lawyer to officially start the divorce process. I handed over everything, the photos, the texts, the receipts, and the recording. You've got a solid case, the lawyer said, flipping through the evidence. The infidelity alone would be enough, but with the financial misuse, we have even more leverage. You're in a good position to protect your assets. I should have felt relieved, but all I felt was hollow. This wasn't the life I wanted to protect. It was a life I was now being forced to walk away from because of her choices. When I got home, I packed a few bags and moved into a friend's spare bedroom. He didn't ask too many questions, just offered me a beer and said, "Stay as long as you need, man." That night, Emily called again. I didn't pick up. The next day, she texted me, begging for a chance to meet in person and talk. I told her there was nothing left to say. The days turned into weeks, and the initial shock began to wear off. Emily moved back into our house, but it no longer felt like it belonged to me. I was staying at my friend's place, drowning myself in work and trying to avoid thinking about the mess my life had become. Emily kept reaching out, her messages swinging between desperation and anger. One day, it was, "I love you, and I'll do anything to make this right." The next, it was, "I can't believe you're giving up on us so easily. What about everything we built?" Each message chipped away at my resolve, but I knew I couldn't cave. She had made her choice, and I was done paying for her mistakes. When Emily was served the divorce papers, I got a flurry of texts and voicemails. She called me every name in the book, accusing me of being cold, heartless, and unwilling to fight for our marriage. But I stayed silent. The lawyer told me it was common for things to get messy, especially when the cheater feels cornered. Stick to the facts, he said. The evidence is on your side. Still, it didn't stop her from trying to fight back. She claimed I'd been distant, that our marriage was already falling apart before Ryan came into the picture. I couldn't believe her audacity, trying to rewrite the story like she wasn't the one who destroyed everything. A few weeks later, Emily asked to meet one last time. She promised it wasn't to argue, just to talk. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop. She looked tired, like she hadn't been sleeping, and her usual confidence was replaced with something more fragile. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, breaking the silence. "Why didn't you just admit you were unhappy?" She stared into her cup, her hands trembling slightly. "I don't know," she said finally. "I didn't mean for it to get this far. I thought I could fix it before you found out." "You had 8 months to fix it, Emily," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "Instead, you just kept digging the hole deeper." She started crying, but I didn't feel the urge to comfort her like I used to. "I hate myself for what I did," she said through her tears. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know, it was never about you. It was my own selfishness." Her words were honest, but they didn't change anything. "I hope you figure yourself out," I said, standing to leave. "But I'm done. This is the end for us." She didn't try to stop me. The divorce was finalized a few months later. Thanks to the overwhelming evidence of her infidelity, I kept the house, most of our savings, and didn't have to pay her a dime. She moved into a small apartment across town, and I heard through mutual friends that she was struggling. I should have felt vindicated, but all I felt was sadness. Not for her, but for what we'd lost. I started going to therapy, trying to make sense of everything. My therapist told me it was okay to grieve, even for someone who had hurt me so deeply. "You're mourning the life you thought you had," she said, "and that's not easy to let go of." Over time, I started to rebuild. I reconnected with old friends, picked up hobbies I'd neglected during my marriage, and even went on a few dates. It wasn't easy, but it felt good to rediscover who I was outside of being Emily's husband. She reached out a couple of times, asking if we could grab coffee or catch up, but I always declined. I didn't hate her. I just didn't want her in my life anymore. Now, almost a year later, I can finally say I've moved on. The pain is still there, like a scar that will never fully fade, but it no longer consumes me. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that love isn't enough to hold a relationship together. You need trust, respect, and honesty. And once those are broken, it's almost impossible to rebuild. To anyone reading this who might be going through something similar, trust your instincts. Don't let fear keep you from seeing the truth. And most importantly, don't settle for someone who doesn't value you. You deserve better. And so did I.